Hello, this is Philip from Beyond the Tabletop, and in this video, I've got Crusade Armageddon, and this is part one, where I'm going through the narrative and lore of Crusade Armageddon. Let's get on with the show. In this part of the podcast, we're going through the lore of Crusade Armageddon, much like what I did previously with the other Crusade books, where I sort of read it, summarized it, and then storytime read it to Dan, where we could both discuss it as we went through. There's no Dan this time, obviously, sad to say, so it will just be me going through the story, and I'll interject a few times where it's appropriate. If you are so lucky to be watching along on YouTube, you can see the book because I've got a second camera set up looking down at the book. So I'll be flipping through the pages as I talk about the relevant sections in the story. So you can sort of look at the layout and also see some of the pretty artwork, basically. Yeah, so cover-wise, looks really gorgeous. You've got a Grey Knights warrior fighting some bloodletters by the looks of it. Really evocative, strong stuff. So yeah, let's get to the first relevant page and we can start with the story. So the first few pages details the two main Imperial forces that are coming to the planet. We've got the Space Wolves and the Black Templars. The Space Wolves are Grimdark's great company. It was Nijar's Stormcaller who received the vision, Doom comes for Armageddon. The Great Company was currently battling the Orcs across 4 systems in the outer reaches of the Armageddon system. Logan Grimnir was informed of the vision and petitioned by the Stormcaller. The decision had been made to risk losing the current offensive, so the Space Wolves embarked on the barge Allfather's Honor and headed to Armageddon, leaving behind them several successor chapters to deal with the Orcs. When they arrived at Armageddon, it was beset by uprisings and civil strife. Logan dispatched his troops to the weakest points to secure them. Meanwhile, we have also the Black Templars, the second Armageddon Crusade. High Marshal Helbrecht was battling Orcs and Tyranids in the Octarius sector, which, if people remember, was a previous campaign book, although they were called Warzone books, back in the last edition of the game. So this is following directly on from the battles that appeared there. So High Marshal Helbrecht, he had a vision, that of a radiant figure towering above him with a burning hand, which was placed on his shoulder. Suddenly he had a vision of blood-soaked pyramids, Marines dying in their hundreds, and blood raining from the sky. He knew it was Armageddon. He just knew. On board the battleship Eternal Crusader, he gathered his trusted sword brothers. He deliberated for hours, deciding ultimately that this was a message from the Emperor and not a chaos-tainted trick, which I guess you do have to worry about. That could happen. When his ship arrived in orbit of Armageddon, the Space Wolves ship Allfather's Honor was already there, and the Black Templars made plans to defend the hives of Armageddon Secundus. Then we have a war without end. So the first page that we get to that's really nice is this system map of Armageddon. You've got obviously the sun in the center, and then to the bottom left, you've got the main planet of Armageddon and the other planets in that system. And then in the top right, we've got the Armageddon sector, which is more like a view of the subsector in terms of the view outside the system and all the warp routes that go to and from Armageddon. So Armageddon's production was not at the height it once was. Ghazghol's invasion, warp storms and endless battles had seen it drastically reduced. However, it was still a linchpin system at the center of several major warp routes. It was also a point of principle to hold out and for the sake of morale across the rest of the sector. Then one of my other favorite pages is Armageddon itself, and a beautiful map showing the continents of Armageddon. Of the 3 major continents of Armageddon, all the major population lies in the central continent, which is split between Armageddon Prime and Secundus. The majority of the Orcs hide between these two landmasses in the equatorial jungle. Within this jungle lies an obsidian monolith, a relic of the First War of Armageddon when Aragorn invaded. Any who encounter the monument fall to murderous insanity. The northern continent is the Fire Wastes, a land too hot to support life, but within it is the Red Angel's Gate, a focus point of warp energies where demons spill through. And then to the south is the Deadlands, which not much is known about. I think it's just an ice plain, but there are, as you can see on the map, a few water plants, and I think they take ice and they melt it down, and then they use that water and transport it to Armageddon Prime and Secundus for the hives to use. So there's a really interesting breakdown of all the hives that you can see on the map. Some of them are ruins from previous campaigns, and also all of these areas that we've talked about will feature in the campaign. So it's good that up front they've given us a good overview. We then have Conquest of Armageddon, which is a breakdown of some of the battles that have happened here. So years ago, Ghazghkull Thraka invaded Armageddon, and the planet is brought to near ruin thanks to the incompetence of the planetary governor, Hermann von Strab. Things are saved, however, by an insubordinate Commissar Yarrick and the intervention of the Astartes. Ghazghkull invades again at the head of an even larger Orc army, but is once again defeated, and he leaves the planet, followed behind by Yarrick and High Marshal Helbrecht, who are pursuing him. When the Great Rift opens up, Armageddon is ravaged by warp storms and beset by demons. The Empiric warp energies ignite lingering traces of Empiric corruption in the planet's crust. In the Fire Wastes, a flat line cracks open, spilling corrupted warp energies which mutate the environment around it. This becomes known as the Red Angel's Gate. As part of Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, World Eaters and Khornate demons make their way to Armageddon system, but are beaten by the Orcs in the Golgotha region. However, the remnants of this Chaos Force continues to pose a threat in the Armageddon system. In the eastern region of Armageddon Secundus, Hive Thoradis is assaulted by Chaos Marines, demons, and Titans. As the Hive is about to fall, Colonel Burkant of the Steel Legion sabotages the Hive's power core, resulting in an explosion which destroys the Hive, alongside both the invaders and defenders. The fighting for the Hive and its destruction feeds the Red Angel's Gate, which starts to act as an Empiric beacon. Aragorn's former flagship Conqueror sees the signal and heads into the warp, dragging a flotilla of chaos ships and demons with it. Now, it's interesting to note that the Conqueror was Aragorn's flagship, and that featured in the Arcs of Omens book, and it's sort of odd that they call it his former flagship, but I guess because he's not around at the moment. That's what I get the gist of at this point in the story. So it's still probably technically his, he's just not around on it at the moment. On the moon of Titan, the Grey Knights divine the Empiric beacon on Armageddon, but also sense that Aragorn is also heading to the planet. The prognosticators of Titan manage to send out warning messages, alerting the Fifth Brotherhood led by Grand Master Rothweir Morvanes, diverting him from the Nachman Gauntlet to Armageddon instead. High Marshal Helbrecht and Nijal Stormcaller are also warned. 3 prognosticators die in sending the message and forever destroy the ancient wooden relics used in this psychic ritual. So it was a bit of a Hail Mary from the Grey Knights, but ultimately the messages were sent. For Armageddon, Steel Legions fall to Chaos Cults and turn on their loyalist allies with the support of Chaos Cults. They soon take over the ruins of Hive Thoradis, and a prophet of the Blood God emerges, calling herself Askara the Ensanguined. The Space Wolves and the Black Templars reach Armageddon. The Black Templars are reinforced with the Death Corps of Krieg. And the Fifth Brotherhood arrives on Armageddon, and a small force is sent out to investigate the Red Angel's Gate, noting that at this point, the Grey Knights, as always, are doing it all in secret and not alerting any of their Imperial allies. And then lastly, we've got Aragorn's former flagship Conqueror, alongside Khornate demons and World Eater ships, arrive in orbit. They fly past the overwhelming Imperial naval screen to drop troops on the ground. We've then got 2 pages that appear in pretty much all the campaign books that we've had so far, which is a breakdown of the Imperial forces known as the Defenders of Armageddon and the attackers known as the Khornate Invaders and Heretics. Although to say they're attackers is a bit of a misnomer because a lot of them are already on the planet and defending areas of the planet themselves. So it's quite detailed, but I'll give you a brief overview of what we have. So for the Defenders of Armageddon, we've got the Space Wolves, Black Templars, Grey Knights, and strike forces of other chapters like the Raptors, Salamanders, Mortifactors, and Silver Skulls. Various regiments of the Astra Militarum, including Death Corps of Krieg, Steel Legion, Vostrian, Talon, and Katajan. Note that Krieg formed the bulk of infantry and artillery, while the Katachan and the Orc Hunters and Miasman Red Cows are based across the equatorial jungle, doing what jungle fighters do best. Meanwhile, the Talon and Steel Legion regiment formations are held in reserve. Additional forces include Penal Legions, Hive Militia, Titans from the Warmongers, which are called Legio Crucius, because obviously Titans have a sort of High Gothic name and a standard name, so both will be used throughout the story. And then there's also Martian Expeditionary Forces, multiple Imperial Navy ships, a rogue trader with Voidsman at Arms, Votan in mercenaries as well, and Adeptus RBTs. Sadly, for those last two, I don't think we actually ever hear of them in the story, but it's nice to know that they're in there and give you some sort of playability options if you want to go through the campaign and give you some great ideas for what you could be running. Meanwhile, for Team Chaos, we have the Khornate Invaders and Heretics. Angron's host contains World Eater ships and ground forces and smaller warbands, along with Angron himself, though this is just a rumour at this stage. Cult masses containing jackals, goremonger cultists, mutants, possessed and corrupted servitors, and lastly, there are also several Renegade Astartes ships and forces. In the planet already, there are indigenous renegades at Hive Thoradis and Hive Hades, the majority of which are Traitor Guard regiments, mutants, and cultists. Mechanical assets include the Titans of the Deathstalker Legio, which in their High Gothic name is Legio Vulpa, and demon engines from the Hellforge Abhelung. Some forces are also redacted and unknown. And then another great page that we see quite often in these campaign books is basically the protagonists of the story. So there's 6 characters on this page with some nice artwork representing each of the sort of major faction leaders. Titled Warlords of Armageddon, we start off with Rothweir Morvanes, the Grand Master of the 5th, who's a Grey Knight. He teleported down to the Fire Waste and found warp-tainted land, skull-faced mountains and black fortresses across the created landscape. He knew of Angron's first invasion, that the fault lines known as the Raid Angel's Wake were caused by his banishing, and that the key to closing the gate lay somewhere in this realm. We then have Stayborn Flint Eye, Grimnar's chosen of the Space Wolves. He was ordered to reach Armageddon Secundus and link up with the Black Templars to retake the ruins of Hive Hades and Hive Thoradis. Then we have Castellan Holzer, Helbrecht's left fist of the Black Templars. Before retaking Hive Hades and Hive Thoradis, Holdis has formed a new defensive position known as the Imperator Line. Combining Black Templar forces with Astra Militarum, it is positioned between those fallen hives and the vulnerable hives of Infernus and Acheron, which are basically 2 hives that are still going strong. Angron, the demon prince of the World Eaters. So the Red Angel's Gate pounded on Angron's butcher's nails, acting as a beacon. As the violence of the planet erupted ever more with the arrival of the Space Wolves and the Black Templars, it became a calling to Angron that he couldn't resist. We then have Jarek Skrill, disciple of the Red Angel. So Jarek and his exalted 8-bound were aboard the Conqueror when the Void ship's demon engines awoke and plunged the ship into the warp, headed to Armageddon. He slew any World Eaters who tried to alter the ship's trajectory. When they arrived above the planet, he knew Angron was coming, so he selected drop sites to spill as much blood as possible in the attempt to earn his Primarch's favour. And then lastly, we have Ascara the Sanguined. the cult firebrand. So she was once a member of the Steel Legion's Orc Hunters, but she stumbled across Angron's monolith in the equatorial jungle. It stoked her murder lust, and she has since become a prophet of Angron, amassing the largest cult following of all the rebel leaders on Armageddon. From her base of Hive Thoradis, she sends out followers across the continent to build more monoliths in an attempt to bring Angron to Armageddon. So those are the main characters. There will be others that appear, but slightly smaller. We then have a map of Armageddon Prime, showing some of the initial drop sites of the Khorne and the movements of the Orcs, and also the movements of the Imperial forces from the Space Wolves and Black Templars of when they land. So if you're watching along, you can see that. So when Logan Grimnar landed at Hive Volcanis on his Thunderhawk gunship, the Hive's defenses were weakened from assassinations and cult uprising. The Wolflord took charge of the defenses and sent units out to secure the plains of Athrend to stop any forces attacking the Hive through the volcanoes mountain region, which is a very kind of key location that we see throughout the campaign. The World Eater forces had created a third front to contend with, landing to the north of Hive Volcanis, forcing Grimnar to divert some forces from the plains to secure the area directly to the east of the Hive. And then alongside Armageddon Prime, we've got the other half of the populated section, which is Armageddon Secundus. And again, a similar map showing the movements of the forces, along with a bit of a close-up of the main area around Hive Hades as well. So Secundus was the planet's industrial heart and more densely populated than Armageddon Prime. All of the hives had suffered damage during the Orcs' invasion, with some like Hive Hades having been completely destroyed. Hive Thoradis and Hades had been taken over by cultists and managed to turn many Astra Militarum regiments to their cause. This influx of heavy armor, artillery and air support allowed them to counter-attack any forces crossing the Ash Waste. With the World Eaters dropping down onto Hive Hades, High Marshal Helbrax split his forces in two. He led one half to seize the Immundi's Bridge, which was essentially a choke point to reach Hive Hades, and then the remaining Black Templars were led by Castellan Holzer and supported by the 74th Krieg Line Corps and other regiments to retake Hive Thoradis. The 74th are the Krieg All-Stars in this story. They make frequent appearances. We then have the Season of the Blood. Surrounding Hive Thoradis were miles of layered trench lines. At a parapet stood Ascara the Sanguined. Attacking her forces was the first wave of Krieg infantry. At her signal, she, along with her cultists, scrambled over the top to meet the oncoming attackers. Their attack saw them sweep the lines down past a fallen Titan. As drop pods fell from the sky with violence all around, the fabric of reality began to break. A tear in the sky grew into a gaping wound, and descending through it, a colossal winged demonic figure appeared. It was the Red Angel himself. As he let out a roar, the red mist fell upon Ascara, and she hacked her way through her opponents with delight. So the red mist is basically the murder lust and the bloodlust that Angron's presence causes upon all that are nearby. We then have Armageddon ablaze, so more and more of the World Eater forces landed on Armageddon. They reinforced Hive Hades and Thoradis on Armageddon Secundus, and they raised great idols which empowered the great warp scar at the northern pole, known as the Red Angel's Gates. The Battle of Immundi's Bridge had ground to a stalemate, with Khorne cultists and traitor guards stopping the Astra Militarum. A World Eater's lander vessel landed on the far side of the bridge, trapping the guard between them and the traitor forces defending the opposite end of the bridge. It took an intervention by Helbrax's own forces to rescue many of the trapped loyalists. Meanwhile, Captain Holzer was supported by Colonel Kors of the 74th, again a new character that we'll see lots, who's leading the Krieg. He proposed building a defensive line as they advanced, so they could easily repel any counterattacks. And so Krieg engineers built the Imperator Line Alphas, a trench network of bunkers, gun nests, and artillery emplacements. As the attack advanced, other Imperator lines were then created. We then had Veon, Iota, and Mortis. Eventually, the Imperial advance had stalled as a grinding attrition of trench warfare took its toll. Line Primus was the final line built. In the sky, a looming silhouette appeared. The World Eater's Conqueror ship had arrived. New forces of Jackals and Berserkers bolstered the traitor defenders and crashed into the Imperial lines. The bloodshed ripped open the fabric of realm space, allowing for Angron to storm back to Armageddon once more. Hordes of demons followed in his wake. Brazen steeds, hounds, and bloodletters all stormed the defense lines, and one by one Primus, Mortis, Iota, and Veyron all fell. As Castellan Holzer issued the general retreat, Colonel Corse called down artillery strikes down onto the vacated positions in the hope it would buy time for the survivors to retreat. Just over half of the original Imperial forces remained. We then get the defense of Vulcanus. Regiments of Steel Legion, Vostrian Firstborn, and Asani Void Sharks formed the bulk of the Vulcanus Fourth Army, which led the defences on the Afrand Plains and positioned to stop anyone from reaching the Mineham Gap, which was one of the few passes through the Vulcanus Mountains. Weeks before the World Eaters arrived, half of the Fourth had been redeployed to the north of High Vulcanus to deal with the renewed Orc threat. The remaining forces deployed closer to the mountains. The outer defences were Orientum and Meridium lines and lightly defended. The most formidable defences was the Vulcine Wall. When the forces of Khorne attacked, mechanized transports allowed them to easily overrun the disorganized defenders, still withdrawing to their new positions. The Meridium line held out for several days, but eventually collapsed under the weight of attacks from all sides once the Orientum line fell. Retreating loyalists were saved in part due to the aggression of the Orcs who wanted to join the fight. The Speed Freaks, the Beast Snagger tribes, left the equatorial jungle and engaged the Khornate forces in their rear, drawing the traitor guard away from the Vulcine Wall. A trio of Space Wolf dropships then crashed down into the defensive lines, deploying Bloodclaws and Grey Hunters. After 3 days of fighting between the Chaos, the Orcs, and the Astra Militarum forces, the Mannheim Gap was still holding, but only just. To the north of High Vulcanus, the bloodthirster Zulkor led a tide of bloodletters and blood crushers against the Hive's outer defences. Logan Grimnar and his Wolf Guard and the Thunderwolf cavalry countercharged. In the ensuing fight, Grimnar slew the bloodthirster in single combat. Agents of Titan. The Grey Knights knew of Angron's manifestation and sent teams to search out for Angron's monolith in the equatorial jungle, while others assailed freshly raised icons of Hive Hades and Thoradis. The Fifth Brotherhood of Grey Knights sought out accursed relics in the hope that they would contain Angron's essence, which they could use as foci, which basically means focus, for a ritual of exorcism. The hope is it would draw out the last traces of corruption from the planet left by Angron's first invasion and seal the Red Angel's gate. 8 such relics would be required. So at least the Grey Knights have a bit of a game plan. The Grey Knight raids saw them find many relics, one of which was a shard of Angron's former weapon, the Black Blade, which had shattered before his banishment in the First War of Armageddon. These shards would form the foci for the Grey Knight's ritual of banishment. The hero of Hell's Reach. High Chaplain Merrick Grimaldus returned to Hive Hell's Reach, a site infamous of his defense of the Temple of the Emperor's Ascendant. He managed to successfully inspire its population to fight against the World Eaters and root out any heresy from within. We've then got defeat at Hive Hades. With Angron's emergence, the assault on the Hive ruins of Thoradis had faltered. The High Marshal led his sword brothers into a second assault of the Eumendes Bridge. This time they were supported by 2 Titans from Legio Crucius. Hours later, the bridge was captured by the Loyalists. It's kind of amazing what you can do when you've got two Titans on your side. The crater of Hive Hades, World Eater forces landed, and in the sky above, demonic forces came through the warp tear in the sky. From the bulk landers, a trio of Chaos Titans strode out. The war engines managed to cripple the first of the Loyalist engines, Irae Ferrum, forcing the other Titan, Cataphractus Pugnus, to come to its aid. As Helbrecht battled around the feet of the two Titans dueling, scores of Astra Militarum forces were gunned down from titanic volleys of fire. Styborn, Flint Eye of the Space Wolves and his battle brothers arrive on the battlefield, and they manage to cut their way inside one of the traitor Titans, planting melter bombs in its reactor core. Despite this victory, Helbrecht's forces had been decimated, forcing the survivors to regroup and rearm at Hive Infernus. As time shifts different for warp entities like Angron, his defeat in the first Armageddon War was still fresh. To that end, he used demonic agents to impel human thralls to construct pyramidal monoliths along 8 ley lines running from the Red Angel's Gate out across the fire wastes. These monoliths were also to be raised at the 2 fallen hives of Theradis and Hades. These structures would channel the warp energies into Armageddon's strata, helping to expand the aura of unreality in the planet. Slaughterbound Jarek Skrill had the tactical depth of any space marine despite his butcher's nails. He used cultists and renegades to reinforce the demonic bastions in the fire wastes, which surrounded the Red Angel's Gate. Meanwhile, Gormonger packs landed in the dreadlands of the southern pole, attacking the water processing plants to deny fresh water to those defending the hives. On the coastal islands around the fire waste, Traitor Guard seized prisons and oil rigs, gaining fresh recruits for training. Grandmaster Morvanes of the Fifth Brotherhood didn't engage in the main battle directly, instead using the turmoil to reach their own objectives. The first was the Equatorial Jungle and Angron's primary monolith. They enacted the ritual of cleansing with the blood of sacrificed gnolls and librarian Loverick chanting invocations. Chaos spawn and mutants erupted from the forest to stop them, but all were cut down. With the ritual complete, a part of Angron's essence that had been bound to this world was severed. But this was the first of many such sites and rituals which had to be completed. But they had still quite a task ahead of them. Meanwhile, brother Captain Toros Hendron worked on destroying Angron's physical form. He led attacks on the Diabolus Forge Complex, a mass of destroyed manufactoriums across the Diablo Mountains. There, the Grey Knights believed an ancient cache of Dark Age weapons sealed away by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Underneath the Forge Complexes, the strike team found a maze concealed by shroud shields. At its center, sealed in a vault, were vortex missiles, weapons capable of ripping open the very fabric of reality. With the ancient weapon secured, Hendron's team then led a campaign into the Fire Waste to destroy any of Angron's monuments. Other forces infiltrated Hive Hades and Theradis, assassinating cult leaders, tearing down profane icons. However, the Grey Knights knew they needed to bring in additional support from their Imperial allies in their esoteric war if there was to ever be a hope for them to win. As Helbrecht's forces retreated to Hive Infernus, the Hive itself was breaking down in law and order. Cultists had overrun the docklands. Half of the Salvlar regiments around the Forge complex had turned traitor. With the defences weakened, orcs surged over the walls and into the forges. With Helbrecht's disdain, his forces went on a brutal purge of the Hive's outer districts, killing friend and foe alike. Since the arrival of the World Eaters, millions had been slain, and the warp energies across the planet had swirled immeasurably. Hive Infernus and Hive Acheron were on the brink of collapse. Grandmaster Morvanes knew it was finally time to reveal the presence of the Grey Knights on Armageddon. Aboard the Grey Knights battle barge Brightsword, Morvanes contacted the most senior Imperial commanders down on the planet. Holograms of Logan Grimnar, High Marshal Helbrecht, Princeps Matthias Colonies, and several inquisitorial agents appeared before him. Of those, only Grimnar appeared to recognize the Grey Knights, having fought alongside them and had been allowed to retain his memory of them. Morvanes gave a dire summary. If the Red Angel's Gate could not be sealed, then the war would be lost. During the battle planning that followed, Grimnar and Helbrecht came to loggerheads and took a lot of effort from Morvanes to intercede. But plans had been made. The primary mission was to seal the Red Angel's gate, but Angron would need to be distracted if this mission was to be accomplished, if not, have him outright banished. A plan was set in motion to use the Imperator line to lure Angron and his forces in. A tactical withdrawal would bait Angron westwards into the Diablo Mountains, where the newly cleared out Diabolus Forge complex could be used to stage a final defense. Grimnar and Helbrecht would lead forces of their warriors in this defense. Meanwhile, a strike force would head north to the Red Angel's Gate, led by Grandmaster Morvanes, alongside Princeps Colonist of the Warmonger Titans, Kaslan Holzer of the Black Templars, Colonel Cross of the Deathcore of Krieg, and Steyborn Flinteye of the Space Wolves, each heading up their own forces. So quite a motley crew. However, as you may have noticed, there is strife between allies. Armageddon's High Governor was shocked by Helbrecht's purge of Hive Infernus and petitioned Logan Grimnar to intercede. This caused a confrontation between the two Space Marine leaders, with Grimnar accusing Helbrecht of not respecting or protecting the citizens of Armageddon. Helbrecht viewed that the current plight of the populace were a problem of their own making. The Black Templars continued on their purge, intent on rooting out the chaos corruption, but unknowingly this actually empowered the demons of the Ash Wastes with all the bloodshed. Helbrecht and Grimnir's forces arrived at the Diabolus Forge complex. The Battle Brothers were reinforced from platoons from Hive Infernus and Katachan reconnaissance regiments, who laid minefields and set ambushes at the foothills of the mountains. Brother Captain Toros Hendron, who first cleared out the complex of orcs, had now moved back into the depths of the Forge complex, taking with them Tech Marines and members of the Adeptus Mechanicus to reach hidden subterranean levels and make preparations for Angron's arrival. When the time came, the Imperator line made a staggered withdrawal back to the mountains. Sacrificial rearguard actions were deployed to hold off the bulk of the Khornate attackers, but by the fifth day, over half of the line's defenders were either slaughtered or exhausted from action. But the plan was a success, and Angron's forces were following them to the mountains. As Angron's forces entered the mountainous valley, artillery barrages opened fire down into the planned kill zones, causing mass destruction. But still, the cultists and mutants hordes came on. Angron was not so stupid. He was not unaware of this trap, and had sent his own forces out. Gormonger packs scaled sheer mountain cliffs, fought inaccessible by the Imperial forces, and struck at Imperial fortifications. Others also joined them. Eightbound transported through the warp to engage in bloodthirsty carnage. Winged demon princes and demon engines soared through the sky. While tracked armor could not cross the mountains, the legged demon engines had no trouble in scaling the treacherous mountain terrain. The Space Wolves defended the eastern approach, while the Black Templars, reinforced with 3 dreadnoughts, oversaw the southern defences. When the attackers' momentum finally faltered, it was then that Angron joined the fight, destroying the dreadnoughts with ease and cutting down dozens of Black Templars. The Black Templars were pushed back and soon joined by the remnants of the Space Wolves, where they withdrew to the Forge complex. It didn't take long for Angron to outpace his Khornate warriors, and soon he found himself in the remnants of the furnace, facing off against brother Captain Toros Hendron and his bodyguards. On the floor lay a hexagram of powdered silver and bone, and at each of the 6 points of the star stood one of the Vortex missile warheads. Angron, unfazed by the wards, smashed through them, his skin sizzling as he crossed them. Once he was fully inside the hexagram, Hendron activated the detonator. The wards were not there to trap Angron, but to contain the warp detonation. Despite this, massive earthquakes shattered the landscape and flattened mountains, killing loyalists and traitors indiscriminately. While within the empiric bubble of the warphead's detonation, Angron's body was torn back into the warp. He was successfully banished, albeit temporarily. The remnants of the loyalist forces then made their way back to Hive Infernus. It's worth stating at this point, I think, that this part of the story happens so quickly. It's like a couple of paragraphs. There's not much build up. There's no fight with Angron. He just gets there and kind of gets immediately blown up. And that's sort of underwhelming, but I guess it is what it is. It's kind of interesting though. I love the concept of the missiles and the ritual. So that was all cool. But yeah, I just thought it'd be worth pointing out that it sort of had a fair bit of build up, and then as soon as you get there, it's over almost immediately. But we're barely through the story, so there is still more to come. So let's get on with the next section. By this point, the battle above the planet had been decided in the favor of the Imperium. The Space Wolves and Black Templar ships withdrew to start repairs, while the Grey Knight's battle barge Brightsword lay in low orbit, ready to teleport forces down where needed. Grand Master Morvain's army was vast, with 24 Astra Militarum regiments, including the remnants of Corps' 74th Line Corps. The Krieg would be well suited to the harsh conditions of the fire wastes, able to deal with the high temperatures, toxic gas, radiation, and toxic storms which blighted the area. The fluctuating warp matter coming from the Red Angel's Gate would be another factor for them to contend with. For the Astra Militarum to cross the boiling sea, seafaring craft had to be requisitioned and launched from the Vulcanus Archipelago and from Yarek's Hope, making the crossing across the island chains. The Space Marines launched from Phoenix Island. They had also retaken Victoronus Starport, which could be used to launch air support for the coming invasion. The Grey Knights spearheaded the assault via teleport strikes and Stormraven gunships, landing to the south of the Chaya-Ranus mines. The Space Wolves simultaneously infiltrated defense bunkers and batteries, which allowed the first Imperial landers to reach the beaches relatively unopposed. Beyond the beaches lay the Ranus ore works, a vast area that was once used for mining and industry. Beyond that was the Ranus fortified region. Constructed to hold off against the Orc invasions, it was now occupied by heretical cults and penal legions, including Ascara the Ensanguine's owned cult of Crimson Deliverance. Fighting amongst the ore complexes was brutal, with cultists and mutants rampaging out from the underground networks. There were Helldrakes and traitor marine fighter craft in the air, and demons spilling through from the warp. Meanwhile, irradiated sandstorms blasted those not in shelter, and warp storms tore open the ground and caused loyalist forces to succumb to hallucinations. Despite this, the Death Corps of Krieg ground onwards, supported by the Grey Knights and Space Wolves, and by the second day they had reached the Iron Line, and by the third, a breakthrough assault had begun. Ascara the Sanguines had left the Radis to oversee the defences north of the Chaya-Ranus, forming a loose alliance of traitor forces that were supplemented with Legio Vulpus's Titan Tarda Mors and 2 small Reaver Titans. The Death Corps lines faltered as it came across the Renegade Titans. Demons spilled out from the warp, drawn to the bloodshed like a moth to a flame. Support from the Loyalists came in the form of the Titans of Legio Crucius, which helped turn the tide in their favour. Wading out from the ocean came the newly repaired Warlord Titan Ire Ferrum and Cataphractis Pernus. The 2 traitor Reaver Titans were quickly failed by their combined firepower and forced Tarda Mors into a retreat. The Wardmakers. Other Grey Knights had heeded the call to aid. Grand Master Aldrich Voldus and Brother Captain Arvan Stern of the Third Brotherhood. By the time they arrived, the battle on the ground was in full swing. The Third Brotherhood joined the void battle above from their strike cruiser Adamastor, launched boarding actions against Chaos ships, killing bridge crews, scuttling craft, or destroying key facilities like engine cores. Their efforts saw the Chaos fleet retreat back into the fringes of space. So it's worth noting that this is a little side story in the marginals of the page, but it's sort of out of sync with the timings that they've been giving us so far with the story, because slightly earlier on, a few pages before, they were saying that the Void War was completely finished and over with, whereas this feels like this is happening beforehand. So they do that sometimes, where they will explain something and then go back maybe from someone else's perspective, and it sort of mucks around with the timing slightly, like they did that when Angron first appeared, and then they sort of repeat him coming back down again, but from the Chaos perspective rather than the Imperial perspective. So yeah, that's just worth highlighting, I thought. We then get on to the Red Angel's Gate. Across the vast fire wastes, Angron's monolith structures peeked out across the horizon. 2 key anchoring monoliths were determined by Grand Master Morvayn. These structures were built at key intersections of ley lines surrounding the Red Angel's Gate. If these could be destroyed, then Morvayn would have a good chance to conduct his grand banishing ritual to close the gate for good. One monolith lay to the southeast of the Crimson Mesa. This attack would be led by Castellan Holzer. The second monolith lay to the southwest amongst the Black Lung tar pits. This would be led by Strayborn Flinteye. Meanwhile, Morvayn would lead the final group towards the Crimson Mesa, where the final assault would begin. With the Imperial victory at the Chana Ranis mines, the traitors fled to the hills. Those that didn't die wanted to earn back Khorne's favour, so joined Ascara, their sanguine, and headed north towards the Crimson Mesa. So the southeastern monolith was carved to resemble a cornate demon's face. Around its base was brass-domed buildings. The citadel was heavily defended by traitorous forces. Holzer commanded 4 platoons of the Sani Void Sharks to take the Dosan Heights to the east. From there, artillery positions could cover the Black Templars' advance to the citadel. Talon and Steel Legion armoured regiments went to the west, crossing the Muradip Badlands to outflank the enemy positions. However, they were intercepted by the Gortred's warband and squadrons of traitor Lehman Rust tanks, led by the once loyalist Graythan Esculpatory. The Black Templars attacked from the south using armoured vehicles to get within close range of the citadel. As they approached, the gates to the citadel opened up. Rushing out came a tidal wave of demons. The disembarked Black Templars engaged in close-quarter fighting, and with the citadel's perimeter weakened, Grey Knights teleported down, throwing holy water onto the fortification structure while recanting litanies of purification. Once the ritual was done, they fought their way free and called down an orbital strike to decimate the rest of the structure. Battle of the Muradip Badlands. This was the largest armoured fight on Armageddon, seeing over 700 armoured vehicles and tanks fighting each other. Though Gortred's warbands was outnumbered 4-1, they still destroyed 6 armoured companies before being beaten. We then have the second structure, the Gore Beacon. Strayborn Flinteye led the assault on the monolith to the southwest. His complement of forces included Space Wolves and Death Corps of Krieg infantry. The structure was named the Gore Beacon due to the blood and gore which flowed from the mouth of the demonic face carved into the rock. In the surrounding area there was treacherous tar pits, so an assault could only be made with infantry alone. Jarok Skrill and his 8-bound lay in wait, luring the attackers into kill zones where they could strike from warp rifts. While the Space Wolves and Krieg attacked from the ground, Grey Knight gunships deployed strike forces to perform the cleansing ritual. Skrill and his 8-bound broke off from the main assault to intercept the Grey Knights. The Khorne warriors cleaved their way through the Brotherhood, seeing their plight. Strayborn Flinteye and his Wolfguard fought to reach them. Skrill and Flinteye fought a heroic duel, both inflicting grievous wounds, but it was Flinteye who landed the killing blow. Skrill's body exploded in blood and gore as his demonic entity screamed back into the warp. This gave the Grey Knights the opportunity they needed to complete the ritual, which saw the Gore Beacon's surface crack and then explode, wiping out the Space Wolves and the 8-bound. However, the Grey Knights were able to use their emergency teleports to escape to safety. And it's worth stating here, I think this is the first time that one of the named characters actually dies. I don't think Nessie Strayborn dies here, even though it sort of implies that they might do. So hopefully we'll see him later, but I can't actually remember for sure. Anyway, let's carry on. As the Gore Beacon collapsed, earthquakes rippled out across the land and the power of the Red Angel's Gate began to visibly weaken. The battle for the Crimson Mesa. With the violent warp storms atop the Crimson Mesa, where the Red Angel's Gate was located, it was impossible to teleport or dropship down. Morvayn readied himself in a Nemesis Dreadnought Walker with brothers Gorn and Voran in their own Dreadnought suits. Accompanying them were 20 brothers of the 5th Brotherhood and the Death Corps of Krieg, who had divisions of tanks followed behind by their infantry. Smaller squads of Space Wolves and Black Templars supported the advance. Scattered across the Crimson Mesa were redoubts of artillery and heavy weapon platforms manned by Traitor Guard, hidden behind camo netting, and there was also sandbag emplacements containing hold-down Traitor tanks. So quite heavy defences. Once the first shots were fired, the Krieg infantry moved out from behind their armoured vehicles and used the battlefield smoke to cover their advance. Space Marines assaulting the bunker positions, and while taking out each one was a costly affair, eventually the Imperial forces reached the base of the Mesa. With Colonel Corse and his Krieg guarding the bottom of the Mesa, the Space Marines and the Grey Knights headed up the slope, cutting down the demonic hordes that poured down, attempting to stop them. Eventually they reached the flat-topped summit. With the Dreadknights holding back the demonic hordes, Librarian Torvik and 8 paladins closed in on the pulsating gate. Each carried a shard of Angron's shattered blade in their hand. Holding the shards in the air and reciting incantations, the black blade shards rose in the air. The Grey Knights channeled their psychic energy through the shards in an attempt to reverse the flow of the ley lines. Angron's fury, which infused the land, was now being drawn back out through the Red Angel's Gate. So the Grey Knight's plan was working. As Morvaines battled demons, he could feel a pressure on his psychic mind, that of Angron. At the base of the Mesa, Ascara the Ensanguined, who had rallied troops and cultists to her cause, was now pressuring the Krieg defending the Mesa. With the gates collapsing above, the echoes of Angron's rage came down upon the ranks of attackers and defenders like a wave of psychic energy, turning disciplined Krieg infantry into mindless masses of anger, swinging their lasguns wildly like clubs. Even the commissars couldn't maintain order. Colonel Corse and his command squad became ambushed and cut down by chainsword-wielding jackals. What a horrible way for Corse to go. World Eaters broke through the Krieg lines and started to ascend the slopes of the Mesa, forcing the Space Wolves and Black Templars to repel this new assault. With the Brazen Citadel and Gore Beacon destroyed, the Grey Knights atop the Crimson Mesa could detect the weakening of a Red Angel's Gate and knew they could now perform the ritual to seal the portal. So we've got this lovely piece of artwork with Khorne versus Grey Knights and some interesting looking demon engines at the back. And now we're in the end narrative, which is the last 2 pages, effectively being told as if it's a story like what you would get in a sort of fiction book like you would see in Black Library, as opposed to sort of a more matter-of-fact story like the rest of the book has been laid out. Unsurprisingly, Angron emerged from the gate. Filled with pure rage, he could sense the Grey Knights were near the completion of their ritual. The 8 kneeling paladins were whispering incantations with their Terminator brethren, protecting them with psychic barriers. Angron crashed into the Terminators, bloodletters and blood crushers spilling from the gate behind him. Morvaines and his brothers in Dreadknights moved to intercept Angron, battling through the hordes of demons and mortals to reach him. The ritual was near completion, but Angron's carnage risked prematurely ending it before it could be completed. Angron killed Terminator upon Terminator. He swung down and broke through the psychic shield, burying his axe deep into a paladin's head and through his entire body. Angron saw a shard of his old blade fall to the floor and knew the incantation was weakening. Psychic blasts raged into his body from the Dreadknights. He rushed towards the closest, shoulder barging it and sending it tumbling to the ground. He leapt on the prone Warsuit and split it in 2. He launched himself against the second Dreadknight. This knight, however, parried most of his strikes. Instead, he lashed his tail out to knock the suit to the floor and stamped upon it with his hoof. As Angron raised his weapons to finish off Voran, Morvaines charged forwards to intercept, managing to push Angron back away from his battle brother and towards the gate. The ritual was finally reaching its zenith, and Angron's flesh began to burn and peel. As Morvaines swung his mace, Angron's chain axe blocked it. With such ferocity, it bent the Dreadknight's arm back and tore it free from the walker's frame. Angron's other weapon, Seminarius, slammed down into Morvaine's chest, flooding him with pain. At that moment, the final incantations were made and the ritual was complete. The 8 slivers of the black blade swept away into the gate as if caught in a vacuum. Demons were torn back to the warp. Mortals clutched their eyes as blood poured forth from them as the rift pulled away at their very souls. With Angron's blade still buried deep within his chest, Morvain's willed his dread knight to push Angron back towards the gate. As Morvain succumbed to his mortal wounds, the intertwined two were dragged into their collapsing portal. He knew his duty was at an end, but he knew the battle for Armageddon would still continue. The end. So that was the narrative for Crusade Armageddon. It's definitely a bit different from the other campaign books. For a start, it feels like it's quite a self-contained story that does wrap up, whereas all the other Crusade stories have basically been mostly ending on a cliffhanger, and there's clearly a part 2 coming. And while it implies with the death of Morvain that he can tell that there's still going to be struggles with Armageddon, that's sort of to be expected, because Armageddon is a planet that's permanently at war and it can never not be at war. So the battle, is it the 4th war now? Yeah, I think this would have been the 4th war, if you're going to call it as such, is over. But there will always be a 5th one. There will be more coming down the line, I'm sure. So I liked that it was pretty self-contained. I like that the Chaos players, so to speak, seem to have relative agency in terms of the things that they were doing. They were wanting to build the monoliths to bring Angron there. But then once Angron is there, he's basically just trying to slaughter everything. And almost their job is to stop the plans of the Imperials. And the Imperials are there to try and defend. But then they've got this grand plan from the Grand Master to actually try and banish Angron and also close the Red Angel's gate. So I like that there's like these definitive story beats that they're actually going along. And that feels a little bit better than some of the earlier Crusade books. And I do feel overall that the Crusade books, as they've gone on, this being the last one, have gotten better as the series has gone along, whereas the Tyrannic War one was probably the weakest. And I personally wasn't a huge fan of the Nachman Gauntlet one either. That one was a little bit, it felt like a lot of a retread of the same sort of issues with the Tyrannic War one, to be honest. Whereas the Prior Nexus one felt really good, and then this one's really good as well. Not many people seem to die in terms of named characters. Feyborn Flint-Eye, I think, dies, from what I recall, because once, I think it was the Gore Beacon blows up, don't think he reappears later. I can't quite remember though. So maybe in my recounting, someone picked up him reappearing and maybe leading the fight into the Red Angel's Gate that I seem to sort of forgot about as I was talking through it. And then Jarek Skrill, I think, dies. Obviously, Angron gets banished effectively twice. The first time is actually quite fun, like how suddenly it happens. It is a bit of a gotcha almost, like he gets there. I would have liked maybe a bit more of a fight in terms of an interesting lead up to him meeting the brother captain and getting warp blasted to oblivion. I like that sort of suddenness that he like goes into the hexagram and then it's like we press the button and he just blows up. That was cool, but there wasn't much of a narrative build up for Angron at that point. He's sort of almost like there to allow the Imperial players to do cool stuff. And Angron actually doing his own cool stuff would have been interesting, or seeing him kill specific people would have been really interesting. And I think that's always been Angron's problem, even in the Arcs of Omen stuff, is he's sort of there just to be a bad guy and to make the Imperial characters look cool, as opposed to doing some really interesting stuff himself. If I remember rightly, in Arcs of Omen, the best thing he does is literally die at the end, but he dies while charging into this beacon that goes out into space, and that in turn sends everyone in these across systems completely mad and insane, and turns the murder lust onto everyone. And it even turns Sisters of Battle into a kind of like chaos cultists. They end up falling to chaos as well. Like, that's how powerful it is. So that was really interesting. But that was him dying in that story. whereas I can't think of many kind of cool moments in the battles that he's particularly done. But, maybe I'm forgetting stuff. And obviously Morvain's dies as well, the sort of heroic sacrifice at the end. That was fitting. It's good when Imperial people die as well as the Chaos dies. Pull one out also for Cause, the Krieg colonel. He was kind of cool. He was sort of rooting for him, sort of my spiritual leader as a Krieg fan. So that was cool to see Krieg get a lot of love. I think if you are a Steel Legion fan, you'll probably be quite disappointed with how little they show up in this, and that effectively they are supplanted by Krieg, which I guess is a bit of a downside considering Armageddon is their planet and they are also the other gas-wielding lunatics. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you're a Steel Legion fan, that's a bit of a bummer. I suspect it's just because Krieg have model lines at the moment and Steel Legion don't. Likewise, I guess Yarek's still dead, right? So he goes off and you never hear from him, as mentioned at the beginning of the story. Maybe if there's, I think there's rumours that he might come back alive. I sort of wish he would, because he was such a great character. But also I do like it when characters die. So that's also a good thing too. The characters, there's a fair amount of interesting ones. Ascara, the Insanguine, she was really interesting. Yeah, she's sort of more just a sort of tactician and sort of a spiritual leader, I guess, for the Khorne forces and sort of leading the more human elements, which is really good. But she never really has any like cool, interesting moments. There's a bit where she's fighting past the initial bit where she's sort of fighting over the top of the trenches and she's cutting loads of people down with a chainsword, I think. That was kind of interesting. But I think some sort of more interesting sort of either personal beats where they're talking and doing tactics or discussing things with their fellow Khorne people, or they're just doing cool action stuff and killing other interesting characters is sort of would be great to see, I think, for the bad guys in quotes as well as the good guys, right? So overall though, I think it's been a pretty good story, as always with more modern Games Workshop stuff that isn't like Imperial armor. Everything's a bit timey-wimey. You don't really know how long the actual campaign lasts for. You jump around quite a lot. Stuff happens so quickly. It's like, oh, we're attacking we're attacking the Red Angel's Gate, and we come across this iron line that it only takes 3 days to effectively defeat a bunch of people and do a breach at that point. And it's like, if this was an Imperial armor book, this battle would have lasted 5 to 10 years, if not longer. That's how prolonged and protracted war is shown to be often, especially when it's like trench warfare. It's slow and grinding. And it's not just about the forces that are there. It's like the constant supply of bodies from out of the planet coming to the system to reinforce. That's what was so great about Siege of Rax. It felt very grounded and realistic. Whereas this, everything seems to happen very quickly. People and characters jump around. So in the sort of Forge complex, the brother clears it out, discovers the warp missiles, and then he's said that he's going off to clear out some monoliths in the Red Angel's Gate and up in the Desert Waste, which does happen later. But the next time we see him, he's actually back at that point. He's back at the facility rigging up the ritual and blowing up Angron. So he's either jumping around a lot or the story is a bit narratively loose. And it is a bit narratively loose at times, especially with all the marginal stories, which are really interesting little tidbits and side stories like the space battle and things like that. But what often they do is they're out of sequence with the page that you're on and that you're reading, and will reference stuff more in the past, which is a little bit confusing. And I think that's just done from a layout point of view, maybe. But even from the narrative story, they often go back. And I mentioned before, Angron appears, and then later on they mention that Angron appears. There was also a few confusing moments when I was reading it. They talk about Angron's cruiser that was formerly his, and you don't really realize that he's not on it until much later, because they keep mentioning that Angron is coming to Armageddon. And also at the same time, his flagship is coming to Armageddon. But actually he's coming to it metaphorically, I guess, from the warp, or maybe literally from the warp, because he's doing it from both. So he's coming at it just from a different plane. He's not coming at it from the flagship. So that was quite confusing, especially when you're going through the force org structures of who's on the planet. There's already like rumors that Angron's there on the planet, which at this point in the story he isn't, but technically he is later on. So if this was written sort of post-campaign, yes, it would mention that Angron was there, but then why say he was only rumored to be there, because he definitely was there. So yeah, there's some interesting sort of inconsistencies there, but overall is a really good story. It's probably my favorite so far. I mean, I did really like the Prior Nexus stuff as well. That was really good, but this one felt like it was a much more gripping story, and there was some really interesting story beats. Always love a good map as well, of which there was several, and there's some, gorgeous illustration as well. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. I hope you all enjoyed me recanting it to you. And yeah, if you've read it as well and enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings all about it, positive and negative. It's always good to hear both sides of the coin. I've also not played the campaign for this one or any of the others, but I am playing the 500 Worlds on, which I will talk about either at the end or maybe in a future episode. But yeah, I'd be really interested to hear people's perspectives of the kind of Crusade and campaign system. So that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. That was part 1 of Crusade Armageddon. Part 2 will be all about the Crusade core rules, and part 3 will be the Armageddon specific setting for their Crusade campaign. And if you can't wait for those episodes, you can find it over on the Lookout Sir channel, because these were recorded originally for the Lookout Sir podcast, and they've been split down here for smaller bite-sized content for you to enjoy. If you like this episode, please do give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below. You can, of course, support me over on Patreon as well. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you do want to do some hobbying and you like to convert up your miniatures, please check out beyondthetabletop.com/shop, because that is where I make and sell conversion kits for Warhammer 40k. That's all for this episode. Until the next time, take care.